Welcome back. You're watching the Front Row with me, Akisa Wandera. We are assessing Kenya's development blueprint and the government's delivery of key projects against their funding. What is the net cost-benefit outcome for Njiko? I'd like us to take a look at a report before we get back to the conversation. A huge chunk of resources in the 2021-2022 budget statement tabled in Parliament went to President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy project, which he only has 13 months to implement. So how much was allocated to which project? Duncan Haemba gives us a breakdown.
When Cecil Rhodes, the British colonizer, and his cohorts dreamt of the road from Cape Town to Cairo, their vision was not the road. The road was not their dream. The dream was what the road would do for them.
On 1st June, President Uhuru Kenyatta was forthright when he implored Kenyans to look at the bigger picture of his development agenda as his administration enters the home stretch. With time not on his side, 142.1 billion has been allocated to cater for the Big Four agenda, with food security getting a lion's share of 60 billion shillings, followed by the universal healthcare, which got 47.7 billion, manufacturing 20.5 billion, and affordable housing 13.9 billion to deliver 3,336 units by the end of financial year 2021-2022. Under his latest unveiled four legacy frames: economic acceleration, big push investments, restoration of dignity, and political stability, substantial resources have been set aside for their realization. Under economic acceleration, special attention has been given to what National Treasury calls post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy, whereby 8.6 billion has been allocated for enhancing liquidity in business. Environment, water and sanitation received 7.4 billion. Improving education outcomes has 6.4 billion. Agriculture and food safety at 1.7 billion. Recruitment of health interns 1.2 billion, while KWS community scouts have 1 billion. On big push investments captured as spending on key projects, SGR Phase 2 from Nairobi to Naivasha has been allocated 27.2 billion. Geothermal 11.3, rural electrification 9.3 billion, Kenya Affordable Housing Project again at 8 billion, Mombasa Port Development Project will receive 7.5 billion, LAPSET 4.5, Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company 3.5, Emergency Locust Response has 1.8 billion, construction of affordable housing units an allocation of 1.2 billion, digital land registries 727.3 million, Nairobi Bus Rapid Transport Project will have 700 million, coal exploration and mining at 424 million, livestock production under Big Four interventions will have 156.2 million. 9.6 billion has been allocated under the Executive Office of the President to address the restoration of dignity legacy frame, with Mukuru Kwanjenga getting 1.5 billion, land, housing and development 110.4 million, construction and completion of Mathare Nyayo Korogosho Hospital 400 million, completion of construction and equipping of 5 Level 3 facilities received 205 million, while construction and equipping of 19 Level 2 and 3 health facilities has 840 million.
We remain committed to reducing the level.
However, no figure has been clearly indicated for political stability frame, which anchors the BBI. This is the last budget that President Uhuru Kenyatta will oversee its implementation, as it increasingly becomes apparent that many of the projects may not be achieved by next year, owing to time and financial constraints. Duncan Haemba, KTN News.
All right, and back to our panelists. Kenneth Mwiga is the Director General of Kenya Vision 2030 Delivery Secretariat, Wanjiro Gikonyo, National Coordinator, the Institute for Social Accountability, and Bill Okero, former Senator for Mandera. And quickly, let's just remind you of our Twitter poll question at this hour, where we are asking you, are you satisfied with the government's implementation of development projects against the funds allocated to them? Are you satisfied with the government's implementation of development projects against the funds allocated to them? Tweet us at Akisa Wandera, at KTN News KE, hashtag FRONTROW, and on our text lines, which are open, 22155. I'd be glad to take a look at a number of your responses and even questions for our panelists. I'm sure they'll be happy to respond to some of the questions you have pertaining the budget and specifically on the legacy projects for President Uhuru Kenyatta. Kenneth Mwiga, let me come to you now. At the first part of the show, and thank you for joining us here on the Front Row, both our panelists seem to think that the Big Four agenda remains a mirage, that we did not properly prioritize areas that would benefit Mwananchi in terms of development. Some of this, and I think all of them, all of the Big Four pillars were put in line with Vision 2030 with the intention to ensure that the realization of 2030 fast-track that process. But looking at how things have gone and the budgetary allocations into it, are we aligned?
Thank you, Kisa, and my old friend Bill Okero, and Jiro, how are you? Brief background. The Big Four agenda is an extract from Kenya Vision 2030. It's not a replacement or something new. The Big Four agenda was extracted from MTP3, which is Medium Term Plan 3, which is running from 2018 to 2022. So it is just the areas which this administration decided to focus on in the period of 5 years currently. So the Big Four is very much part of Vision 2030 and is aligned completely with it. Now, I've been listening to the conversation so far, and I just want to contextualize what we are saying here. If you're building a house, or if you're building a construction, and most people will have built something or the other, you realize very quickly that you spend a lot of money in the foundations of your building. In the foundations of your building, it's only you who knows how much money has gone in there, but everybody passing on the road sees nothing. That's because you've gone maybe 6 feet deep, you've put foundation pilings, you have dug basements, you have done many things, right up to the ground level. Everybody passing will be saying there's nothing this government is doing, there's nothing happening here. You forget that you cannot build on air, you cannot build on sand, you cannot build on nothing. So this government is concentrating very, very seriously on the foundations which enable growth. And there's no getting around that fact. Because if you look at what the government is concentrating on, let's just look at the Big Four. You have 20.5 billion given for supporting job creation in the budget. You have 60 billion for enhancing food and nutrition security. You have 47.7 billion for universal health coverage. And this is the time when COVID is messing the whole country, the whole world, especially Kenya. And true to what we say, never waste a good crisis, this government has done tremendously well in improving healthcare. I think all of us are aware that the COVID pandemic has given a tremendous boost to our universal healthcare ambitions. And finally, we have 13.9 billion for the provision of affordable and decent healthcare. What I'm trying to say is that for some time, we are still doing your foundations. We have the SGR being done and extended, consuming billions of shillings. You need to do that so that you can make plans in the future for other things. You talk about Lamu Port, for example. If you don't develop Lamu Port, then we are not competitive in the region. We're taken by Dar es Salaam and Mtwara Port in Tanzania and Bagamoyo Port in Tanzania. So we can't be sitting here saying it is too expensive to invest in our new port when that new port is what we need to be competitive in the region. So I just want to contextualize what is happening. Kenya is a young country. And it's only in the last 15 years or so, I would say, 15 maybe to 20 years, where government planning and government budgeting has been directed to war in a sequential manner, in an organized way. under Kenya Vision 2030 because that's our development blueprint. What this means in short is that we are going to spend a bit of money on our foundations, the foundations which enable growth. Now, we can argue about whether you need to go 6 feet down or 10 feet down. You can argue about whether you need to put hardcore 7 lorries instead of 2, but in the language of construction, which many people will understand, and that's the easiest analogy I can find, you find that you spent a lot of money in your foundations to enable growth. If you want to have a 60-foot tower, you're not going to have 1 meter deep foundations. If you want to have a KICC, if you want to have a UAP tower, if you want to have a KCB tower in Upper Hill, those foundations are not 10 meters deep. They go deep, and that costs money. And that's where we are in this country right now. We are still investing. So we're not going to sit here and do pari passu with the developed West, pari passu with Asian tigers. We are where we are. We are in Kenya. We are Kenyans. This is our tax revenue, which we are spending. We don't want to be overtaxed as Kenyans. That's another complaint we have. We don't want to be overtaxed. So government has to get a fine balance between taxing, collecting taxes which you need and what we need to build.
Great. I should ask this. Bilokero seems to think that the point of departure for Vision 2030 and the Big Four agenda is that there was no inclusive participation of the people on the projects that they feel will bring ultimate benefit to them. Is that the case?
Bilo, my friend, I can't imagine anything that could be farther from the truth. Speaking to you on the road from Narok, I've spent the whole day today at a Kikao in partnership with State Department for Youth, and we have been talking directly to youth, hearing what they want, what are their problems, what is it that they need government to do. We're calling it Gava Eco Ground. The government is on the ground. And nothing could be further from the truth. There are budget participatory hearings which are held, they're publicized. So anybody who has an opinion about what the government should prioritize, or which new areas should be looked at, or where funds should be allocated from A to B, has had a lot of chance. Let's just be honest about this. This is not a secret process. The days when the Minister for Finance would appear from Treasury Building with a briefcase nobody knew the contents about are gone. Long before the budget is read, there's a budget statement which is released. The estimates are actually online long before the budget is read on the 14th. So there's a lot of public participation. If you ask the organized groups, KEPSA, KAM, etc., they'll confirm that they have made a memorandum and submitted them to government. So as far as we know, and as far as the facts stand, there's been ample opportunity for every Kenyan to give their opinion on what should go into the budget.
I'll have my panelists react to what you've said. Wanjiro, that we are still at the foundation stage. We are building a house. We are putting a strong foundation. Before we move forward, how do you feel about that statement?
Right. There's the issue of the foundation. There's also the issue of public participation. On the issue of the foundation, the facts speak for themselves. A report of Parliament, the Parliamentary Committee on Infrastructure, reviewing the SGR, actually said, one, the project was inflated, the project cost was inflated. There were irregularities in the way that project was originated. The implementation of that project did not abide by the environmental impact assessment recommendations. It did not abide with the recommendations from the World Bank, from civil society. That project was parachuted into the budget. And in fact, the contract between the government and the Chinese, the Exim Bank, was signed before cabinet approved the initiative. So what we are dealing with here, Kisa, is not that government doesn't have an appearance of public participation. Sure enough, they post the adverts in the newspaper. We give submissions because we do. But at the end of the day, the projects are already determined. And it is actually a very tokenistic participation. And unfortunately, not only is the participation tokenistic, the oversight by Parliament has also been extremely weak, because whereas the Committee on Infrastructure gave very clear and strong recommendations on the SGR, and they recommended that the loan be renegotiated because Kenya cannot afford to pay for a loan for an investment that is unproductive. And why is it unproductive? Because the model picked for the to build a new railway was not what was in the Vision 2030. Vision 2030 said rehabilitate the railway line, which would have been a fraction of the cost, about 1/6 of the cost that we ultimately paid. But because of budgeted corruption, and this is documented, the Auditor General did an audit of this and has done an audit of other projects and said this is budgeted corruption. There are interests around the projects in the Vision 2030 who get involved and are able to commandeer that process, and in the end wind up giving us a very expensive project that was then negotiated, was, of course, it's financed by debt, whose interest payments are actually exorbitantly high. And we should now begin looking at the socioeconomic crimes against the people of Kenya by state and public officers who abuse and violate their offices to get us into contracts which we will pay through the high taxation. So part of the problem we are having linked to the SGR, because it's an expensive model, in an inefficient model, a model that cannot pay itself, and contracted then at very high rates on a secret contract whose contents have never been divulged. So even as Parliament is saying renegotiate, they don't even know what's being renegotiated.
Right.
But the point is this, to make these payments, the government then introduced the Rail Levy Fund, which was then tacked on to the fuel, the levies on fuel. And is part of the problem we have with the rising cost of fuel, because right now, cost of fuel globally is going up as economies open up. This was always going to happen. Because we have overborrowed, we have zero fiscal space. We then find ourselves in a situation, apart from the COVID crisis, apart from the households we have had do not have food, apart from those who have lost their jobs, apart from the debt repayments, we are going to be facing higher fuel costs. And today in the papers you saw, government has been stepping in to intervene to meet the gap between the cost of fuel so that they don't pass the taxation on to Kenyans, but they're eventually going to be forced to do that. So, Kisa, my last point is this. This government has has been very indisciplined. Despite very strong public finance requirements, it's been very indisciplined, and it has violated those rules. And it has weakened institutions. We've seen the attack on the judiciary. We've seen the undermining of parliament, yes, and the lack of meaningful participation. So I think the Director General is giving very good PR, but he's not telling Kenyans the truth.
I'll have him respond to that when we get back from the break. Bill Okero, I want us to go on a break for a minute, in under a minute, but quickly. The Budget and Appropriations Committee of Parliament proposes that due to the prevailing economic distress, the COVID-19 pandemic, that the Big Four projects be implemented in their fourth medium-term plan to cover, 2022 until 2026. Is this a viable suggestion from Parliament?
In fact, they were very clear, and the reason is this: they were very clear that we need to scale down the infrastructure projects. That is what is in their report. They are very clear in February. The reason is because Kenya is among one of the top 10 countries that are very vulnerable to the adverse effects of the COVID-19. And so we believe that our economy will be adversely affected. It will take time. It will take time. It will take time for the economy to recover. So you need to release resources for other measures to support people who have been affected. You know, all those, look at what intervention measures other countries are doing. It's directly aimed at reviving the economy. You assist small businesses, you assist big businesses, you give people tax breaks, you allow people to, to engage, to employ people, you provide vaccines, you go directly to try and get, but what we are doing now is collecting every, and the point I want to conclude by saying, really, I agree with most of what she has said, but look at this way. Just to finance this big project, we not only have borrowed and will pay taxes to pay SGR, but for the last, from 2013, you are paying 1.5% for railway development levy in every dollar that you import. Our imports average about $16 billion annually. And you can imagine, you have to pay 1.5% on that is making the cost of everything that is imported, raw materials. So I mean, we have projects, but the returns are not there. The point I think my friend Ken needs to address is, fine, we have been putting up this foundation. It's been the same story. When you look at it from the time this country got independence, the story is we are laying foundation. We are a young country. For heaven's sake, we cannot be young at 60. And continue. We are spending billions. From 2013, when I remember I accompanied the president on that trip when he went to look for the SGR fund. And that was 2013. The argument was, in the next 4 or 5 years, you will see the returns. We are now 8 years. We are not seeing the impact. We are not seeing the returns in terms of enhancing our competitiveness, in terms of reducing the cost of freight, or you're not seeing it.
So when do we move away from building foundations?
I think you cannot, that analogy, it's not really the issue. The issue is some of these projects are misplaced, and that is why we don't see the outcomes. That's why we don't see the results.
And Kenneth, I'll be coming to you to respond to that. At what point do we move away from foundations, building foundations? And a lot of questions I'm seeing here is, when do we start to see the fruits of these projects? You'll be responding to us on that and more. Remember, at Akisa Wandera at KT News KE, #the front row. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back with more.